Potion Masters, Chapters 3 and 4. A taxi idled in front of the Stitzer home as Gordy helped the driver load his mom's bags in the trunk. The concrete driveway felt cool beneath Gordy's bare feet, and he yawned before wiping the sleep from his eyes. He stared up at the twinkling stars overhead. There was absolutely no sign of the sun anywhere to be seen. Gordy's mom had a flight in less than 2 hours to Topeka, Kansas, where she would be the keynote speaker at an important convention. She was always leaving early in the morning or catching red-eye flights after midnight. Gordy had grown accustomed to hefting his mother's suitcases into the trunks of taxis. For the moment, the Stitzers owned only one working vehicle, the family van. The other, a Subaru station wagon, remained lifeless in the garage. Gordy's mom had allowed a trusted colleague to pour one of his special automotive concoctions into the gas tank, rendering it inoperable, at least for another week or two. On her way out the door, Gordy's mom ran through a short list of particulars. "You've got my cell number memorized, and here's the information of the hotel where I'll be staying, should you run into any sort of trouble. Of course you won't be able to reach me there until this evening, but I'll call you as soon as I land." She leaned forward and kissed Gordy on the cheek. "Also, try to spray Baudry at least once with the room freshener before tomorrow. He's beginning to smell." Gordy nodded. He had expected Baudry to be on her list. And lastly, I want the twins staying up late tonight," she said. Gordy started to nod his head once more, but caught himself mid-bobble. "You want them to stay up late?" That was an odd request. It was Sunday night, a school night. "Isaac's coming down with a bit of cold," she said, flipping one hand absently as she rummaged in her purse with the other. "I'd like to see where it takes him before I cure it. I have a new mucus-reducing potion I've created, and I need test samples. So feed him plenty of sweets and have them watch something scary on the television." She patted her pockets. "Am I forgetting something?" Gordy shrugged. "I don't think so." He nibbled on his thumbnail and nudged a rock with his toe. Now was the time to ask the question he had been pondering all weekend long. "Mom?" Gordy's voice took on a softer, more meaningful tone. "Before you go, is it all right that I asked Max and Adeline to come over later today?" "Of course. Why would I care if they come?" His mom straightened abruptly, and she fixed Gordy with a stern expression. "You mean come over to the lab?" Gordy grinned and sucked back on his teeth, trying his best to look hopeful and deserving of having his wishes granted. "I don't think so," she said. "The lab's in disarray. There are ingredients strewn about for projects that aren't to be tampered with, and Baudry has reached near toxic levels." "We won't touch anything marked volatile," Gordy insisted. "I know which ingredients to avoid, and I'll spray Baudry like you asked, twice even." His mom sighed, her eyes softening just a smidge. Then they narrowed, and Gordy wasn't certain which way she would lean. The cab driver cleared his throat and pointedly looked at his watch. She turned and sighed. Yes, I'm coming." She swiveled back to Gordy and patted his shoulder. But before she could make her decision, which appeared to be leaning toward a firm "not this time," Gordy blurted out, "I'm almost 12 and a half, and I don't have any lab partners. You said that I needed some my own age. How am I supposed to become an elixirist without lab partners?" "Do you really want to get into an argument with me over Max and Adeline?" She narrowed her eyes. "They're not even supposed to know about our secret." What a disaster that had been. Gordy had invited his two best friends over for dinner without clearing it with his parents first. But how was he supposed to know that there had been a mishap with one of his mom's growth potions, and she had left the door open to air out the lab? Before he knew it, Max and Adeline had come face to face with a mealworm the size of a Rottweiler. So much screaming, mostly from Max. After they calmed down, which took a few hours, his two friends had demanded answers which Gordy felt he had to provide. "But Mom, they're smarter than you give them credit for, and they both volunteered." "Oh, I know they're smart, Gordy. They're your friends, and they're great kids, and of course they volunteered. Who wouldn't want to be a part of what we do? But you need DRAM lab partners," she said. "Max and Adeline don't have the gift. They'll never be elixirists." "But they could learn with my help," Gordy insisted, "and they haven't told a soul about our secret." She smiled. "Didn't you have something to do with that?" Gordy shrugged. His mom had wanted to wipe their memories completely, but Gordy had talked her into letting him give them a vial of Turkish gizly goop instead. It would prevent them from spilling the beans and was a much safer procedure. There were several kids who would be perfect Dram Lab partners, his mom said. Des Mumphrey lives just a half-mile away. Andy's allergic to everything, including the air, Gordy said. One whiff of Baudry and he'll explode. When I get back, we'll sit down and discuss appropriate lab partners for you, ones who can better assist your advancement. Gordy opened his mouth to protest, but struggled to find the words. It was too early in the morning, and he felt fuzzy-headed from the smell of taxi exhaust. If only he had gone to bed at a reasonable hour, instead of staying up well past midnight mixing potions in the lab, then he would have been better prepared for this argument. Now, what would he tell his friends? They had been so excited when they talked about their plans on their way home from school. They're my best friends, Mom, Gordy muttered, and I trust them. He stared at his feet, his shoulders slumping in defeat as he awaited his mom's verdict. She tapped her toe impatiently on the asphalt and then groaned, "Oh, fine." Gordy screwed up his face in confusion. "So they can come over?" She didn't answer, but Gordy leaped in the air, punching his fist above his head. "But believe me, bub, I have my vials logged. I know the exact amounts in every bottle, and if I notice one cork has been slipped from anything kept in the bottom left-hand drawer, you'll be banished from the lab until further notice." Gordy nodded vigorously. "Agreed, absolutely, and we won't hang out long in the lab, I promise." "No, you won't. An hour tops, and then it's back upstairs with the twins. And no allowing Max to sneak a peek at Baudry. Keep him zipped, clean up your mess, and lock the door when you're done. Understood?" Gordy saluted, his cheeks crinkling from his widening smile. "Understood." His mom grinned. "This is a big step for you, lab partners." She stared past Gordy as if caught up in a memory. "I want a full report the moment I land. I'll be back by..." She finished her travel arrangements from her purse and checked her itinerary. 3:00 tomorrow afternoon. She gave Gordy one last kiss on the cheek for good measure, and then she was gone. Chapter 4. Gordy bounded down the basement stairs, cycled through the combination lock, and then heaved open the heavy metal door to the Stitzer lab. He instinctively ducked beneath a drying rack hooked to the ceiling where all manner of plants and herbs dangled like the whiskers of a gigantic walrus. Toadflax, garlic, barberry, and arrowroot, to name a few. 3 apothecary tables lined one of the side walls with multiple drawers bearing labels such as monarch wings, porcupine quills, and shaved ivory. A long oak table stood in the middle of the room with a collection of flasks, crucibles, and Bunsen burners. Embedded in the far wall was a soot-stained fireplace that pumped smoke through a vented chimney in the bricks, and stacked neatly against the stove were several pots of varying shapes and metals. Cauldrons, as Gordy's mother preferred to call them. A beige sign hung from a hook above the stove, listing the 5 rules of potion making. Number 1, never draw unnecessary attention to the potion community. 2, never administer a potion to anyone without first testing it out on yourself. 3, never cause permanent bodily harm or death with a potion. 4, never concoct a potion using banned ingredients. 5, never enter the forbidden zones. Specialized air freshener in hand, Gordy unzipped the plastic shield surrounding Baudry. Even though he was wearing a gas mask, Gordy retreated a step from the smell. Yellowish vapors rose from the opening, and he unleashed a heavy spray from the can, filling the bag. "Baudry, you need a bath!" Gordy zipped up the shield, turned on the oscillating fan next to one of the apothecary tables, and waited for the noxious smell or levels in the air to dissipate before removing the gas mask. Baudry didn't respond. Baudry couldn't respond. That was because Baudry was the mummified remains of King Baudry of Mesopotamia. Gordy's mom had won him at an auction during one of her conferences 2 years ago. Now all manner of tubes, sensors, and wires ran out of the mummy's body, supplying numerous flasks and vials with fluid, high-level potion-making material, stuff Gordy didn't dare fiddle with, since he had no doubt those were the types of chemicals capable of the disastrous results his mom frequently warned him about. Spraying the inside of the bag with air freshener and the occasional changing of a flask or two was all his mother would permit Gordy to do. "Can we come down now, Gordy's best friend?" Max Pinkerman shouted from the top of the stairs. Gordy glanced at a flower pot resting next to King Baudry's bag. A pale yellow flower was beginning to nudge its way out from its glistening green pod. "The canary bellflower is blooming," he announced. "All clear." The sound of charging footsteps filled the stairwell as Max bounded down to the basement level. Joining Gordy, Max stared at the mummy encased in its protective shielding. Max took in a deep breath and promptly gagged. "Black! It still stinks in here." Adeline descended the stairs with her fingers pinching her nostrils closed. "I hope it's safe," she said, her voice echoing, "because if I end up poisoned or hexed in some way, I'm going to be very upset." Adeline was wearing her earbuds, and the sound of heavy music thrashed out from under her long black hair. "You won't get poisoned," Gordy assured her. "What?" she shouted before removing one of the buds. Gordy grinned. "What are you listening to?" Adeline lived in the house kitty corner to the Stitzers, and Gordy had been friends with her since her family moved to the neighborhood from El Salvador 6 years ago. She usually listened to music much softer. Adeline frowned and glanced at her iPod. "This is a Cattle Slayer, I think." "Why are you listening to that?" Max asked, scowling. "It's for my end-of-term science project," Adeline said. "We have 2 weeks left before it's due, and I'm guessing you haven't started. Have you, Maxwell?" Max scoffed and swatted his hand dismissively. "I've got plenty of time. Besides, how does listening to that garbage have anything to do with science?" Adeline smiled. "I'm studying the effects different music has on moods. Right now, it's death metal, and I think it's making me angry." Max snickered. "I don't think that's the music's fault." He gazed longingly at the murky bag where Baudry slumbered and elbowed Gordy in the side. "What's it like?" The shield's material was too opaque to see through, though Gordy noticed Max trying, his eyes narrowing to slits so thin they could have been sealed shut. "He's gross," Gordy said. "Kind of like a meaty skeleton, but one that's wearing a cloth diaper." The mummy had been dead for centuries, but Gordy often felt sorry for the emaciated man, forced to reside in his plastic enclosure wearing only his underwear. "Poor Baudry," Gordy thought. "Incredible," Adeline exclaimed, finally taking her eyes off Baudry and absorbing the scenery of the Stitzer lab. She plucked the remaining bud from her ear and silenced the clattering noise of Cattle Slayer. "This is it, no? Your mother's lab?" She approached the closest apothecary table and timidly reached for one of the containers resting on the counter before withdrawing her hand. "May I?" she asked Gordy politely. "Yeah, sure. Everything on that table is relatively safe," Gordy said. "Just be careful and don't spill anything." Adeline carefully plucked one of the vials from the counter and read the label. She made a sour face. "Is this really koala kidneys?" Gordy smiled. "If that's what it says." Max grunted. "It's not from an actual koala, probably just a fake one." Adeline rolled her eyes. "Fake koalas? You know what I mean," Max said. Gordy took his two friends on a tour of the lab. Adeline asked a plethora of questions regarding the various containers of mysterious ingredients and their uses and functions. There were hundreds of vials, each carefully marked in Mrs. Stitzer's near-perfect penmanship. Max seemed interested, but he split his time listening to Gordy while keeping his eyes glued to Baudry, slumped in the corner. It was only Gordy pointing out the bottom left-hand drawer of the third apothecary table, the one Mrs. Stitzer had strictly forbidden, that piqued Max's interest. "What sort of stuff?" Max squatted to take a closer look at the drawer marked volatile. "Seriously, Maxwell, don't touch that." Adeline had moved away from the table, her arms folded, her body tense and rigid. "Chill out. I'm not touching anything," Max said, trying unsuccessfully to tug the drawer open. "Sorry, guys, you can't even look in there." Gordy had never been allowed to even peek inside, but he figured it contained the most dangerous items of everything in the lab. He was positive his mom had some sort of alarm that would trigger it at any intrusions. "Well, this is all really cool," Adeline said. "It's just like you told us." "Thanks," Gordy felt a sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the past several years, ever since his mom first allowed him access to the basement, Gordy had been forced to keep the existence of the Stitzer lab a secret. It was dangerous to let outsiders know about the potion community. At the time, Gordy hadn't understood why it was so dangerous, but he obeyed his mother's wishes just the same. His brother and sister vaguely understood that something was going on in the lab, but their mom had fed them a long-lasting potion of forgetfulness to prevent them from accidentally revealing the secret to one of their school friends. She had administered the same potion to Gordy when he had been the twins' age, but after a few days the effects of the drought had mysteriously worn off. It had baffled his mom at first until Gordy revealed to her how he had devised a concoction of his own which countered the forgetful nature of his mom's potion. His mom had taken him downstairs to the lab the very next day. And now here he was, showing Max and Adeline his secret world, the world of potion making. Max plucked a small vial of liquid from the counter and held it close to his eyes. "I can't even read this," he said. He reached out to set the vial back on the counter, but missed and nearly dropped it. Luckily, the glass didn't shatter, but the vial rolled along the countertop, heading for the edge. Gordy was about to leap over to keep it from falling, but Adeline got there first. "Eres tan torpe," Adeline snapped, carefully catching the vial and handing it to Gordy. "Maybe we're not ready to be down here," Gordy shrugged. Adeline was probably right. Neither one possessed the necessary skills to become an elixirist. According to his mom, that was something you were born with. But Gordy didn't mind. Max and Adeline were his best friends, and as far as he was concerned, they made the perfect lab partners. End of chapter 4.